Russia has been forced to admit to the Russian public that the inflation is not slowing down. And in fact, their economy is still in free fall. Just how did Putin box himself into a stagflation crisis? And is he solving it by cracking down on billionaires the only way he knows how? I'm Paul, US Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Winning a war is actually pretty boring. Repetitive training, careful budgeting, diligent maintenance all make the difference between victory and defeat. But commanding a military at war in today's sponsor, Supremacy World War III, is completely different. Supremacy World War III is a free online PvP strategy game set in modern global conflict. It's a massive game where each world has over 99 players and over 100 unique units, from fighter jets to airborne infantry. You'll compete in wars that can go on for weeks, and it's up to you to decide if you want to join powerful alliances, antagonize rivals, or even betray your friends. Like real war, you need to build and research the right military to stay on top. There's a huge tech tree with over 250 different technologies to give your military the edge. I love that it's cross-compatible on PC and mobile, so you can play the same game on the same account whether you're at home or slacking off at work. For the next 30 days, you can use my link in the description, and Supremacy World War III will hook you up with a limited time unit, the Bomber. So click the link in the description, choose your nation, and fight your way to victory. Okay, so Russia has, of course, rolled out a VAT tax hike. We've talked about this earlier. VAT taxes are a value add tax that's sort of taxing goods at every step of the production process. But it ends up, this is actually a fairly massive hike because while it takes it from 20 to 22%, that's a 10% hike, but it's a 10% hike at every single step of the Russian production process, meaning that the Russian finance minister has admitted that the VAT may affect company financial results and its impact on inflation is estimated at around 1%. It's going to be more than that, which has been accounted for in wage and social payment index projections. Now, this is a problem because, well, the Russian tax increase is to pay for the war. And normally you can have a tax increase when you have a thriving, robust economy. And well, the Russians don't. The number of new housing projects in Moscow is at a 12-year low. And you might recall the last time Russian housing projects were this low, the European debt crisis was in full swing. So the problem is, of course, that you can see how this would be a crisis. Imagine you are a Russian developer and you want to build one of these apartment buildings. Well, just like building your own house, what are you going to do? You're going to find a lot. You're going to say, I'm going to build my dream home here. You go to a bank and you say, give me a loan. The bank says, great, I can leave you a loan at 6%, 7% interest. Well, in Russia, because the central bank has been fighting inflation for so long and so hard, the loans are around 20 to 25%. So you're already going to pay a fortune as a developer just in interest cost, right? But it gets worse because you then have to hire labor, and it's going to be very expensive because construction workers, they are generally men and they're generally able-bodied. Well, able-bodied men, in a lot of cases, have been recruited at tremendous salaries and then sent to the front and liquidated. And this is a huge problem for the construction industry and other male-dominated industries like gas and agriculture because, well, there's no one to actually do the work. But it gets even worse because remember, you also have to buy materials. But because of sanctions, those materials are very expensive and are coming primarily from China. So as a building developer, you need to find a project that's going to give you at least a 25% return to justify the price of the loan. You also have to make sure you budget enough to hire unskilled laborers to complete construction and more expensive materials. This is one of the reasons why we're starting to see this stagflation crisis, because there's not that many buildings that check all of those boxes, which means that increasingly what you're seeing is what economists call crowding out. Crowding out is this idea that when government spending expands to a certain large enough size, what it begins to do is create what we're seeing here, which is that private sector investment struggles to survive when there's a giant vortex of government spending sucking in resources. Because remember, some of that steel that would go into this building is competing with Russian tank builders, right? Russian artillery piece manufacturers. That steel could be going to the war effort, not to this building. And so deconflicting these things, right? The steel being imported from China is the Russian developer is going to pay so much. It has to pay as much or more than the government is, right? Simple supply and demand. And you're seeing that when government is the biggest demander, it means that the rest of the economy just has to fit in on the edges. The problem that Russia is seeing is that this crowding out is happening all over the economy. So it's not just the developers and construction workers. We saw it, for example, at a major Russian civilian truck manufacturer who cut workers' hours to 4 days a week because there's, well, no one to sell to. No one's buying trucks because, again, who's going to drive them? No one. And so this, again, in a functioning, healthy economy, not getting bled out by a war effort, this is not a problem that can really occur. This only occurs when there's some kind of external shock, like the oil crisis in the 70s, because you have both high inflation, rising costs, as the Russian central bank acknowledges, they're not going to slow down, and you have falling employment. It's a total disaster. It is a real crisis for the average Russian. But the problem is that Russia isn't a democracy. So the average Russian, whether their life gets better or worse, whether they're dying in a muddy field in Ukraine, or whether they are living in their middle-class apartment, there's no difference to the regime. But you know what does make a difference to the regime? Whether the people with actual power and resources, i.e. Russian oligarchs, whether they are on board with the regime's objectives. And there's more and more evidence that that's not the case. You see, Moscow has actually arrested a Chechen billionaire over a decade-old contract killing. Now, I want you to understand here that this sounds like a cold case that suddenly got solved, but this is just not the case at all. Because this was a contract killing in January of 1999 by someone who was hired reportedly by this Russian billionaire, Ibrahim Suleimanov. Now, I want you to understand that charging someone with killing from 90s Russia is like, it's like charging somebody for jaywalking in New York. You couldn't, it was so common. It was unbelievably common. Gang wars, right? Businesses were all in constant conflict in 90s Russia. That's one of the reasons Putin was able to take power, is because with a lack of a strong central government, Russians were just running amok. There were no institutions left to maintain public order. And so the idea that that anyone even did enough forensic analysis to actually hold on to evidence from 25 years ago is a joke. But also the idea that it can be linked to this guy, also a joke. But here's the problem, is that it doesn't matter, because this is a foregone conclusion. Suleimanov is going to be arrested. He's going to be put in jail. He's going to be tried and convicted. Right? He also ran afoul of the administration in 2007 when he did a 10-year bid for fraud and money laundering, which, again, being a Russian businessman and engaging in fraud and money laundering is like being a fish that engages in swimming. It's just par for the course. But I think the real message here is that the Suleimanov and his son are actually the owners of an IT company that develops booking and digital solutions for the aviation sector, including a Leonardo flight reservation system used in 80% of ticket sales in Russia. Right, and he was reportedly tied to another exiled Russian billionaire. And all this, the takeaway should be that, once again, we're seeing Vladimir Putin use the stick, right, which is the violent and force of the state to keep oligarchs in line. But here's the problem with that, is that every time he uses the stick to beat an oligarch into jail or out a window or exiles him from wealth and power, the other oligarchs look around and go, my turn is going to be soon, right? It's one thing if you say, hey, It's a little bit like living in an area with high crime, right? When you read about a crime, a shooting in the news, you go, "Man, wow, that was really close to my house." But at some point, when you start to see more and more of your neighbors get robbed or shot, sooner or later you go, "Hey, I need to take intervention. I need to take action. We need to do something because I will be a victim soon." And this is what happens. More and more, I think, of these Russian oligarchs are going to look around and say, listen, this war is a disaster. We're all broke like a joke. And one day, Putin's going to come for us, our businesses, our families, or they might even just come for us for looking the wrong way at him. And when that happens, right, what they are forced to do is make a choice. And the choice no longer becomes, do we support Putin or oppose him? The choice is, do we, if we are going to get taken out one way or another, do we try to save our skins and get rid of Putin? Or do we simply wait till it's our turn on the Putin punishment conveyor belt?